this wasn't just wedding sabotage. It was psychological warfare. Eleanor Vance believed she could isolate Clara, overwhelm her emotionally, and force her into submission in front of 200 guests. She thought panic would make Clara obedient. But she made one catastrophic mistake. She underestimated what happens when a calm woman stops reacting emotionally and starts planning revenge with surgical precision.
Welcome to Crimson Retribution. Today, we have a brand new story for you. I'm going to tell you about a family that built the perfect trap, only to watch it snap shut on themselves instead. If you've ever had a family member try to sabotage your life, drop your age in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the part where I wound up on the 6 o'clock news. Now, get comfortable and enjoy a story of revenge served ice cold. My name is Clara Hayes. I'm 32, and on my wedding day, I found my venue setting up for a totally different event. 2 hours before the ceremony, I was standing in my dress in a Seattle sculpture garden, watching them hang a corporate banner. My future mother-in-law had canceled my booking 2 days earlier and didn't bother to tell me. She'd hijacked my $20,000 deposit and moved my wedding to the Vance Grand Hotel, a venue I specifically refused to book. She expected me to have a meltdown. She was sure I would just give in. But my job is producing massive live events, so I moved my entire wedding in 90 minutes. What I did next completely dismantled her family's empire. Welcome back to Crimson Retribution. If an in-law has ever tried to control your life, tell me your age and where you're from in the comments. And be sure to subscribe. Now picture this, 1 p.m. on a raw, windy Saturday in October. The wind blowing off the sound was vicious. It whipped the skirt of my gown as I stepped out of the limo. The waterfront art gallery should have been full of my flowers and my string quartet. Instead, workers were unloading banners for a tech company's fundraising event. The entire place was silent except for them. Behind me, the catering truck was parked, its engine humming. Marcus, my caterer, got out. He walked toward me, holding his tablet, and his face was a mix of confusion and deep concern. He angled the screen so I could see it. It was a cancellation email sent from my account 2 days ago. He said he assumed it had to be a mistake. It wasn't. My hand started to tremble as I pulled out my phone to call Leo. I was supposed to marry Leo Vance at 3 o'clock. His phone rang twice before it clicked over to his voicemail. I just stared at my screen, numb. To understand what was happening, you have to understand the Vances. Their entire world is built on public image and having absolute control. Leo is the flawless heir. His mother, Eleanor, is the one who pulls all the strings. The second Leo put a ring on my finger, Eleanor treated our wedding like a hostile takeover she had to manage. I refused her money. I found my own venue. I hired my own vendors. I did it because I knew that if Eleanor paid, Eleanor owned it. I thought my independence was my shield. I tried calling Leo again. It went straight to voicemail. The air was getting colder and I couldn't feel my hands. We had 200 guests showing up in under an hour. Marcus stood next to me, shivering slightly, and asked if he should call the police. But before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Leo. It was a text from Eleanor. I opened it. Just 2 quick sentences. Art gallery was double booked. Moved everything to the Vance Grand Hotel. See you soon. I read it a second time. The Vance Grand was Eleanor's fortress. It was the hotel she demanded we use 6 months ago. It was the one place I had absolutely refused. The gallery was not double booked. The cancellation email was not a mistake. Eleanor had sabotaged my wedding day, kicked me out of the venue I chose, and moved my entire event to her home turf. She was convinced that with guests arriving and the clock ticking down, I would have no choice but to show up at her hotel and bend to her will. I looked at my phone, then at the fundraiser banner. There was no way I was going to the Vance Grand. That text may have been short, but it was the end game of a year-long power struggle. The Vance Grand wasn't just another hotel. It was Eleanor's entire world. The place she tried to force on me the day we got engaged. She had pushed a brochure for the Vance Grand across the table before she even congratulated me on my engagement. I told her no. I needed my own space. The Vance Grand meant Eleanor would pick the menu. It meant Eleanor would manage the guest list. It meant Eleanor would own the whole day. Moving my wedding there without telling me wasn't just changing the plan. It was an ambush. My phone vibrated again. It wasn't Leo. It was a text from Zara. Zara is married to Leo's older brother, Dylan. She's a forensic accountant in the city. She is brilliant, perceptive, and a black woman who has spent 4 years masterfully navigating the Vance's universe of polite, soul-crushing snobbery. Zara handles the Vances by treating them like a business she's investigating for fraud. She doesn't fight them. She observes them. She tracks the data. She operates from the shadows. Her text was short. I'm in the Vance Grand Ballroom. Eleanor planned this weeks ago. She has custom ice sculptures with your new monogram. Don't you dare show up here. Customized sculptures. That takes weeks to design and freeze. The gallery's double booking was a complete and total lie. Eleanor set this whole trap up a month ago, and Leo knew. Leo was standing in that ballroom at that very moment. He let me drive to this empty gallery, knowing I would find a corporate event and a forged cancellation email. The old Clara, the one who spent 2 years desperately trying to get Eleanor's approval, would have gotten back in the limo. She would have gone to that hotel. She would have faked a smile, walked down an aisle designed by her adversary, and married a man who let her stand alone in the cold. Eleanor was betting on my fear of making a scene. She assumed that with everyone arriving, I would rather swallow my pride than cause a scandal. I turned off my phone. I looked at that tech company's banner. I chose scandal. I turned to Marcus. He was still by his truck, holding his tablet, waiting for my command. Marcus ran a high-end catering business he'd built himself, starting from a single food truck. He hated the entitled old money attitude of places like the Vance Grand. He had met Eleanor during our menu tasting. She had treated his head chef like a servant. He never forgot it. Marcus, I said, is your contract tied to that hotel? He glanced at the fake email on his tablet. Then he looked directly at me. My contract is with you, Clara, not with her. We serve wherever you say. I need a venue, I said. I need a huge, empty space anywhere in Seattle. We have 90 minutes. He didn't hesitate. The event industry in Seattle is a small, tight-knit world. Planners and vendors always have each other's backs. Marcus took out his phone and paced a few feet away, speaking quickly and quietly. I heard him say something about a last-minute cancellation. I heard him mention a bride in a bad spot. He ended the call and walked back. South Seattle, he said, the Zoo District, a repurposed shipping terminal right on the waterfront. Steel beams, polished concrete floors, massive rolling bay doors. A photo shoot just finished. The place is clean and completely empty. It's ours if you want it. It's 20 minutes from here. Steel beams and concrete. It was the perfect anti-Vance hotel. No crystal chandeliers, no valet parking, and no Eleanor. We're taking it, I said. The bride had vanished. The event producer was in charge. My job is to coordinate giant music festivals. I manage logistics across 3 countries, divert gear around flash floods, and solve impossible problems in real time. A wedding is just a small-scale production. What's in the truck? I asked. Everything, Marcus said. The filet mignon, the wild salmon, all 20 cases of champagne. The only thing we don't have is tables. The terminal uses industrial spools as tables, I said. It's perfect. Roll out. Marcus waved to his crew in the truck. His team began securing the equipment. I stood in the wind, planning the next hour in my mind. My florist was scheduled to arrive at 1:30. I found her contact information and called her. She was 5 minutes away. I told her to redirect her van to the Sodu terminal. She didn't argue. Professionals love a clear plan of action. Next, the officiant. Judge Peterson was a retired federal judge and a close friend of my dad's. I called him just as he was getting off the freeway. I gave him the new address. "Are you all right, Clara?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. "I'm better than all right," I said. "I'm taking out the trash." He laughed softly. He said he would be there in 25 minutes. I texted Zara back. "Relocating the wedding to Sodu. Tell absolutely no one." Her reply came back in a second. "I'll run interference here. Keep me updated. Burn it all to the ground." Zara was now my spy on the inside. She would manage the Vances while I created a brand new reality a few miles across town. I glanced down at my dress. It was classic satin, made for gliding across a gallery floor. It was not designed for a working pier. I reached down. I no longer cared about looking perfect. I bunched the heavy skirt in my fist and marched to my car. I slid into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life while the heater blasted my numb fingers. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the art gallery. The useless valet signs got smaller in my rearview mirror. I left the whole disaster to fade behind me. The drive to the Sodu district gave me 20 minutes of silence. My mind raced through every last problem. The new venue was secure. The food was on the move. The officiant was on his way. But the biggest problem was far from solved. It was 1:20 in the afternoon. 200 guests were on the freeway in their best outfits, heading for a locked gate and the wrong party. Once they arrived, they would see the banners. And they would panic. They'd start making calls. A few of those would get to Spencer, and he'd point them straight into the ambush at the Chestnut Hill Manor. I had to intercept my guests first. I needed to divert every car before they hit that roadblock. A mass text would ignite a firestorm of questions. Calling each person individually, that would waste the little time I had. I needed one clean, synchronized alert. It was time to draw a line, separating my friends and family from Eleanor and her exclusive little world. I gunned the engine, merging onto the Mass Pike. The answer was staring me in the face, sitting in the cradle right next to my steering wheel. All I needed to do was tap send. I wrenched wheel, pulling onto the shoulder and jamming the car into park. The engine idled, a low hum in the cold November air. The clock on my dash read 1:25. In my business, you learn that time is the one resource you can never recover, and I was bleeding it. 200 guests were crossing the suburbs of Boston in black tie, thinking they were heading to a garden reception. The moment they found those locked gates, chaos would erupt. That chaos would turn into a flood of phone calls, all routed directly to Eleanor Prescott at the Chestnut Hill Manor. I grabbed my phone from its mount. I remember scoffing at paying a wedding planner $5,000 for data entry 8 months ago. So I built my own wedding app instead. It was a simple tool for tracking RSVPs, listing dietary needs, and pushing out updates on hotel blocks. Elena mocked it over dinner once, said it was like signing up for a corporate retreat. She preferred overpriced stationery and fancy calligraphy. But here's the thing, by laughing at my little app, she never bothered to ask what it could actually do. It wasn't just an itinerary, it was a communications command center, and I held the only admin password. I opened the control panel. 212 names lit up my screen. The first rule of a compromised supply chain is to isolate the bad nodes. I pulled up the master guest list and hit the filter option. I scrolled straight to the Prescotts. My thumb moved with surgical precision. I unchecked Eleanor. I unchecked her sisters, the two who'd spent years giving me career advice that was just thinly veiled insults. I unchecked Spencer. I unchecked his brother, Thomas. I left Clara's name checked. She was my source on the ground, my eyes inside the manor. In under a minute, I had scrubbed the notification list clean of anyone loyal to the Prescott family. Only my people were left. Even the cousins from California who secretly despised Eleanor stayed on the list. I opened the mass alert function. A blank text field appeared. ready for my instructions. When you're managing a logistics crisis, emotion is poison. Panic creates bottlenecks. Clarity creates flow. I typed a brief direct message. Emergency venue change. The Chestnut Hill Manor is unavailable. The ceremony and reception are now at the Maritime Warehouse in Boston's Seaport District. Address attached. Food and drinks will begin at 2 p.m. See you soon. I didn't mention the Prescotts. I didn't invent some story about a burst pipe. I just hit send. A green delivery bar shot across my screen. The app blasted out a push notification and a text message to 180 phones simultaneously. I watched the read receipts climb in real time. In seconds, cars across the state would be taking new exits. Their GPS navigations would all recalibrate. My guests were successfully redirected. Eleanor spent weeks planning her little ambush, but she was playing the wrong game entirely. She was using paper invitations and social pressure. I was using live data streams. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway. The Boston skyline rose up ahead, sharp and gray against the winter clouds. I used the voice command on my wheel to call Julian. He picked up instantly. The sound on his end was controlled chaos, slamming truck doors, people shouting orders. "We're all loaded up," Julian said, breathless. I could hear glass clinking and tires crunching on gravel. I pictured him loading crates of wine, moving with the same focused fury that I felt. We were perfectly in sync. He wasn't about to let his food be ruined by some family squabble. "Are the warming ovens secure?" I asked, eyes on the road. "Strapped in and running on the generator," he confirmed. "My kitchen staff is already on their way in a second van. We taped the voided contract right on the main gate for whoever shows up next." "Perfect," I said. "I'm about 15 minutes away." "What's the setup time look like?" "The warehouse is a clean slate," Julian said. "No prep required." The manager left the loading bay doors unlocked for us. We'll pull right in, get the tables set, and start serving. We can have champagne flowing by the time your first guest arrives. I thanked him and ended the call. The physical part was done. The venue, the supplies, the guests all handled. But as I took the exit for the seaport, the reality of what I was doing began to set in. The logistical problems were solved. Now the emotional battle was about to start. I turned into a cobblestone alley behind the warehouse. This neighborhood was a different universe from the manicured estates of Brookline. It was all brick facade, steel fire escapes, and cold pavement. It was authentic. Julian's catering truck was already at the loading dock. I stepped out, lifting the train of my wedding dress above the grimy street, and walked inside. The space was gorgeous in its raw industrial way. High ceilings, exposed girders, and massive windows looking out over Boston Harbor. Julian's team moved like a well-oiled machine. They set up long wooden tables, threw crisp linens over them, and built a temporary bar out of old shipping crates. This was nothing like a stuffy country club wedding. It was a bold, defiant celebration. I stood there watching the room transform. In 20 minutes, my loved ones would start arriving. They would expect to see Spencer. They'd take in the huge warehouse, see the food and champagne, and then they'd ask where he was. A typical bride would be a wreck right now. She'd be sobbing in a back room, mourning her ruined wedding and the man who wasn't there. She'd be crushed by the humiliation. But I wasn't afraid. I felt a calm, razor-sharp focus. I wasn't about to hide. I was going to stand at that entrance, greet every one of my guests, and offer them a glass of champagne myself. I would meet their gaze and let them wonder. Spencer's absence wasn't my failure. It was a critical defect in a product I was about to integrate. This was just a last-minute recall. For years, the Prescott family treated me like an accessory for Spencer. My job was to smile for the cameras, show up at their fundraisers, and keep my mouth shut to maintain their precious public image. Eleanor always saw herself as the director of this entire production, with me as a silent extra. But today, I was the one writing the scene. The first cars appeared in the lot across the way. I watched my uncle step out, staring at the warehouse with puzzled expressions. My friends from school piled out of another car, laughing as they navigated the cobblestones in high heels. The plan had executed flawlessly. My guests were here. As Julian approached with a glass of water, a custom ringtone pierced the air. It was coming from my coat, which I'd left on a chair. I walked over and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with a photo of Spencer from a trip we took 2 years ago. He was grinning, a beer in his hand, without a single worry on his face. The clock read 1:45. The trap at the Chestnut Hill Manor was set. The grand ballroom was empty and waiting, and Spencer Prescott was finally calling, probably to ask for my ETA. He thought I was on my way to his mother's turf, completely beaten. He was expecting a sobbing, frantic bride, begging for a way out that he could pretend to give her. I looked at his smiling picture, took a long breath of the cool warehouse air, and knew the first phase was over. Now the real fight was starting. I swiped my thumb to accept the call. I pressed the phone to my ear, and I said nothing. I just waited. The sound of clinking glasses and a faint string quartet filtered through the phone. The distinct, stuffy ambience of the Chestnut Hill Manor. Spencer sighed. It wasn't a sigh of relief, but one of pure annoyance, like his driver was late. "Maya, where are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp and strained. "My mother is about to have an aneurysm, and these patent leather shoes are torturing me. I told the shop they were a size too small. Of course, no one listens. Just give me an ETA. We need to get pictures done before the entire family descends." And all the while, I was standing in the middle of a cavernous brick warehouse, completely alone. Caterers rushed around me with platters of food and cases of champagne, but my fiancé wasn't concerned about me. He wasn't bothered that our wedding location was completely locked down. No, he was mad about his scuffed shoes and being slightly behind schedule. "I'm not on my way," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm outside a locked gate at the Palisades. The whole place is dark, Ethan. There's a cancellation notice taped to the door." He drew a sharp breath. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded like a spin doctor about to manage a crisis. "Okay," he said. "Don't panic. My mother has already handled everything." The venue had a major electrical fire on Wednesday. Total disaster. The whole place flooded from the sprinklers, he said. Catherine called the Heritage Grand and pulled some serious favors to get us their main ballroom. She honestly saved our wedding. Get in your car and come here now. This can still be perfect if you just get here and put on a happy face. I let him tell the whole lie. It was smooth. Clearly he'd practiced it. But liars never check all the details. Every deception leaves a trace. "Wednesday, you said?" "Yes," Ethan answered, a little too fast. "Wednesday afternoon. It was chaos, but Catherine worked a miracle." I looked out across the lawn at my friend Sarah, who was setting up a welcome table. She's the one who forwarded me the email an hour ago. An email from a photographer. "If the fire was on Wednesday," I asked, "then why did our photographer's assistant email me on Monday to confirm the new lighting plan for the Heritage Grand?" "The agency we hired books 6 months out. They confirmed changes in writing." "So did Catherine pay a massive rush fee, or did she cancel our real wedding venue weeks ago?" The faint music drifted from his phone. Ethan said nothing. The silence was an answer. It was the sound of his entire story collapsing. "You're being hysterical," he snapped. His voice dropped. The charming groom persona vanished, replaced by a trapped animal. "She did us a huge favor. Do you know what it costs to fix a last-minute problem like this? You should be thanking her. We even got our full deposit back. We saved $20,000 that we desperately needed." I closed my eyes and the sounds of the gardens around me disappeared. That one single phrase echoed in my head. We saved $20,000 that we needed. I have my own career. I paid for this entire wedding. I didn't need $20,000. I needed my fiancé to not be a liar. Ethan was a real estate developer. He made well over 6 figures, drove a brand new convertible, and only wore custom suits. He never missed a golf trip with his partners. He was supposed to be the successful one. Why did we need the money, Ethan? I asked. The question cut straight through his weak excuse. I could almost hear him sweating through the phone. Because building a future is expensive, he stammered. The condo, we need the cash for the closing costs. But that was a total lie. You don't sell your own wedding for parts unless you're in some kind of serious financial hole. And then all the pieces clicked together. I thought back over the last 6 months. Ethan, constantly on his phone during dinner, the hushed, tense calls he would take on the weekends, the way he'd slam his laptop shut if I came into his office while he was staring at architectural plans. He told me it was just due diligence, exploring new projects. You weren't exploring anything, I said, my voice quiet but sharp. You lost it all. What are you talking about? He shouted, his voice cracking. That downtown high-rise, I said. You've been sinking money into that failing project all year. You said it was a sure thing, a genius move. But the city denied the zoning permits 3 weeks ago, and your investors pulled out. Ethan's silence on the other end of the line was a full confession. I saw the whole ugly situation clearly. He was drowning in debt. He couldn't ask his mother for a bailout because Catherine demands perfection from her son. Admitting he'd failed so badly was impossible, so he needed cash and fast. And half of our $20,000 wedding deposit was the perfect solution. He went to his mother, suggested moving the wedding to her stuffy Heritage Grand, and let her believe it was her brilliant idea to save the day. So Catherine agreed to cancel our original venue and made sure the refund was sent directly to her. She got the formal old money wedding she always wanted, and you got my half of the deposit to pay off your loans. You sold our wedding, I said, the words feeling like acid. You watched me plan and budget and stress for an entire year. You let me show up here to a locked building. All of it just to cover your own tracks. Maya, wait, Ethan pleaded, his tone shifting from anger to pure desperation. It was a temporary loan. I was going to pay you back. Besides, the club is much more elegant. Everyone is loving it. My parents are thrilled. Just get over here. We'll accept some champagne, we'll smile for the cameras, and we can sort out the money next week. Just please play along. He still didn't understand. He honestly believed this was something we could fix. He thought that having our guests already there would force me to walk down that aisle for his mother. He thought I valued appearances more than my own self-respect. I looked around the beautiful gardens. My friends were laughing by the entrance. The bar was open. A string quartet was warming up. This place felt honest and beautiful and right. I am not coming to the Heritage Grand, I said. Ethan let out a frustrated sigh. Maya, don't be so dramatic. What's your plan? You're stuck out there. Our guests are arriving in 15 minutes, and you are making everyone late. Actually, Ethan, I said, my voice calm, the guests won't be there in 15 minutes. Right now, they were arriving at a beautiful garden estate in the hill country. They're walking in right now. They're drinking the champagne I picked out, and they're about to eat the food I paid for. What? Ethan shouted, his voice breaking. The soft music from his end of the call suddenly sounded pathetic. What are you talking about? I moved our wedding, I told him. I changed the venue on the website. I made sure your entire family was removed from the email update list. So my friends, my family, and every person who actually supports me is here in the hill country. You and Catherine are standing alone in an empty room. Maya, you can't do this to us, he sputtered. The contract for that club is under my mother's name. There's a food and beverage minimum. She's going to be charged for thousands. Sounds like a liquidity issue, I said. Maybe you should have hedged your bets. I pulled the phone away from my face, his small, frantic voice still yelling from the speaker. Then I hung up, and the screen went black. I just stood there for a moment in the middle of the garden. The crushing weight I'd been carrying for months completely lifted. I wasn't a panicked bride trying to fix a disaster. I was free. I had just removed a tumor from my life. Our engagement was officially over. I straightened the front of my gown, turned, and walked toward the entrance to greet my guests. I heard all the sordid details about the heritage grant later from Sarah. As a corporate auditor, she has an amazing eye for detail and a professional appreciation for watching a good fraud fall apart. She gave me the full story. At 2:30, the ballroom was perfect. Catherine was wearing a gold dress that looked more appropriate for a bride than the groom's mother. She was standing near the entrance, sipping mineral water and going over her welcome speech. Sarah's cousin, who was working the event, saw her tell the staff the whole tragic story of the fire and her own heroic last-minute intervention. The tables were decorated with towering floral centerpieces. Those monogrammed napkins were folded perfectly beside every empty plate. A live jazz trio was playing on a small stage, and a line of waiters stood ready with silver platters of gourmet appetizers, waiting for guests who were never going to show up. The room was a showcase of quiet luxury, all crystal and polished marble. The invitation said 3 o'clock for the ceremony. By 2:45, Catherine was expecting waves of arriving guests, ready to praise her for saving the day. She imagined them gushing over her, but the massive marble lobby was completely silent. The valets were just standing around under the porte-cochere. At 2:55, Catherine checked her watch and adjusted a flower arrangement. She told Ethan there was probably a big accident on the freeway delaying everybody. Ethan just stood by the bar, looking miserable in his new suit, checking his phone every 5 seconds. A string quartet began to play their prelude music. The cheerful melody echoed strangely against the empty walls and pristine tablecloths. A few of Ethan's relatives who had missed my email blast were lost. His great-aunts from Dallas pulled over to call for directions and texted Ethan's cousin for help. The cousin didn't bother explaining. She just opened her phone, dropped a pin on the Vista Gardens estate, and forwarded my text. Her message was simple. The bride is here and the champagne is flowing. The aunts immediately turned their car around. They'd always found Catherine to be completely overbearing and much preferred a real party to her stuffy events. 3 o'clock came and then it was gone. The grand ballroom was still a ghost town. The musicians awkwardly finished a piece and the resulting silence was heavy. By 3:15, an elaborate ice sculpture of 2 swans was beginning to drip onto the imported linen. The catering manager exchanged worried glances with his staff, wondering if they should offer hors d'oeuvres to a room that held only 2 people. Catherine's perfect mask was finally starting to crack. She ordered Ethan to call his uncles. He tried 2 numbers. Both of them went straight to voicemail. Leo finally went to his mother and told her what I said on our last call. He explained how I'd used our wedding app to redirect the entire guest list. Vivian just laughed a sharp, horrible sound. She said I was bluffing. She claimed my family lacked the pull to book a top-tier San Francisco venue on a Saturday. She pictured me crying in some hotel lobby and that my guests would eventually give up and drive to her exclusive club. She told Leo to have the kitchen hold the dinner service. But by 3:30, that fantasy was over. The ballroom was empty. Then, the Club S event director walked in. His name was Mr. Davis. He wore a crisp suit, held a leather folio, and he did not look happy. Places like that don't run on favors, they run on binding contracts. Mr. Davis walked straight up to Vivian. He cleared his throat and asked if the timeline needed an update. Vivian snapped back, telling him to keep the food hot, blaming it all on a non-existent traffic jam. He opened his folio. He said the kitchen could hold the starters for another 20 minutes, but the final bill was set in stone. And in that moment, Vivian's entire power play just disintegrated. When she reserved the ballroom just 2 days ago, she pulled strings to get the space on short notice. She leveraged her platinum membership to displace another party and secure the best room. She signed a last-minute agreement. That agreement had an extremely strict food and beverage minimum. The Pacific Heights Club required a guaranteed $50,000 in catering. That policy was absolute. If 200 people ate, the bill was 50 grand. If 3 people stood in an empty room with a string trio, the bill was still 50 grand. Vivian stared at the contract. The color drained from her face as she argued, her voice rising above the music. She claimed it was an emergency, that the club should waive the fee as a courtesy. Mr. Davis offered a polite, cold smile and pointed to her signature. He reminded her the chef had already purchased and prepped 200 servings of seared scallops and duck confit. The club had 20 servers on staff, all earning overtime pay. The bill was final. It would be charged to her membership account by 5 p.m. Leo heard every word from the bar. His secret, catastrophic investment losses had pushed him to steal my $30,000 deposit. He thought he was so smart. He thought he had finally fixed his financial mess. Now, he stood watching his mother get hit with a $50,000 bill for a wedding with no guests. His theft hadn't solved his money problems, it had just torched the Sterling family's finances. The $30,000 he stole from me wouldn't even cover most of the club's bill. The numbers were crushing. My move wasn't just a social embarrassment for his mother. It was a complete financial disaster for them. Vivian dismissed the manager with a trembling hand and turned to Leo. That polite, high society mask was gone. She finally understood I wasn't weeping in a hotel. I was hosting a fully funded party all the way across town. And I was making her look like a total fool in front of her own elite friends and staff. She grabbed her expensive wrap. She ordered Leo to bring the car around. They were going to flee the empty ballroom, drive to the Soma district, and drag me back. They honestly thought they could bully me into coming with them if they just showed up. My friend Sophia watched them storm out. She finished her champagne, placed the glass on a tray, and followed them, taking her time. The game had just escalated. The Sterlings were speeding toward the gallery, expecting to find a broken bride. They had no idea what they were driving into. The atmosphere inside the galvanized gallery was incredible. You could smell fresh paint and city rain drifting through the high, open ceilings. 200 guests filled the massive space. There were no seating charts, no stuffy traditions, just whitewashed brick, polished concrete floors, and gorgeous modern art. It was the complete opposite of the sterile, perfect world Vivian demanded. My digital switch had worked without a flaw. Every guest I wanted was here. I watched my relatives get out of their cars, their formal wear looking amazing against the gritty, chic backdrop of the arts district. They walked in through the huge steel doors looking confused, probably expecting a total disaster. Instead, they walked into a masterclass on how to pull off the impossible. My friend Alex and his catering team were heroes. Within an hour, they had built a full bar out of reclaimed wood. Waiters moved through the guests, pouring glasses of wine from the cases. You could smell the incredible scent of truffle risotto and seared salmon wafting from the pop-up kitchen. Alex had saved the entire menu. I stood right by the entrance, greeting every single person who came inside. The silk of my wedding dress flowed across the concrete floor. I wasn't hiding in some office. I hadn't cried one tear. For a half hour, I greeted all my friends and family. They would hug me, but their eyes kept searching the room, looking for a groom who wasn't there. When anyone asked where Leo was, I just smiled and pointed to the bar. I told them to get a drink and that I would explain everything very soon. Leo's cousins from Napa were in the thick of it, all the same relatives. Vivian always put at the worst table because she found them too loud and knew money. Tonight, they were first in line for a cocktail. They were leaning against a huge painting, sipping wine and watching the scene unfold with a grin. They knew their Aunt Vivian, and they knew her manipulations. They could feel a storm was brewing. By 4 o'clock, the gallery was buzzing. The last of the guests had arrived. Everyone was accounted for. It was time to tell them the truth. I caught the DJ's eye, who was set up on a loft. He nodded, cut the music, and handed me a wireless microphone. I took a deep breath and walked to the center of the floor. The chatter died down to an expectant silence. 200 faces turned toward me. The quiet in the art gallery felt heavy. "Thank you all for being so flexible today," I began, my voice clear and strong under the high ceilings. I used the same tone I use for critical investor meetings. "I know you're all wondering why we're in an art gallery instead of the Fairmont Grand. And you're also probably wondering why I'm up here alone." A few guests shot each other worried glances. Leo S. brothers moved closer, their eyes locked on me. 3 days ago, I said, my mother-in-law canceled our reservation at the hotel. She never told me. She lied to the hotel staff, faking a story about a major plumbing disaster. She then had my $30,000 deposit rerouted and tried to move this entire wedding to her private club. She did it to hijack an event she didn't pay for, assuming I would bow to her demands instead of facing public humiliation. A wave of shocked gasps moved through the older guests. The idea of sabotaging a wedding was unthinkable. To hear it described so calmly, without any tears, was even more shocking. Leo knew, I stated, letting those 2 words hang in the air. He knew on Tuesday, and he still let me get in a car to drive to a hotel with chained-up gates this afternoon. He let all of you fly across the country to a venue with a voided contract. He did this because his investment firm is quietly imploding, a detail he never told me about. He needed my stolen deposit to help cover his massive, secret losses. He saw our marriage as a bailout, not a partnership. The silence in the gallery became deafening as the betrayal sank in. I scanned the crowd, meeting the eyes of friends who came from around the world. "I don't bargain with liars," I said simply. "I don't enable cowards, and I will not marry a man who is a puppet for his mother. For these reasons, the wedding is officially off." I paused, letting the weight of that final choice settle over the room. However, I added, gesturing toward the catering tables, "The meal has been paid for in full, the bar is open, and this incredible venue is ours for the entire night. So I invite you to eat, drink, and have a wonderful evening. Please consider this a party celebrating me dodging a very expensive bullet. Thank you for being here." I set the microphone down. For 3 long seconds, no one moved. Then Mike, the head bartender, made his move. He wasn't just listening. He had his phone up, camera aimed directly at my face. He had been recording since I started speaking. Mike was in a private online group called the Bay Area Event Guild. It was a secret network of caterers, photographers, and planners who warned each other about nightmare clients and scammers. Mike had a particular hatred for the snobbery of the private club crowd. He despised people who treated the service staff like they were invisible. My speech wasn't just for my friends and family. It was concrete proof. Mike was already typing a caption, ready to post the video for the whole network. By morning, Vivian Sterling would be blacklisted across the city's entire event industry. No vendor with an ounce of self-respect would ever work with her again. The quiet in the room finally shattered. My lead programmer from the analytics team raised his cocktail glass. He let out a piercing, triumphant whistle. The rest of my colleagues immediately started cheering. A wave of applause echoed off the high, industrial ceilings of our new office. This wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar of support. My friends from my coding bootcamp days surged forward, hugging me tight. My father slapped me on the back, a huge, amazed grin on his face. The crushing tension that had sucked all the air out of the room was gone, replaced by the electric buzz of a crisis perfectly handled. The DJ dropped a deep house track. The beat vibrated up through the floor. Caterers emerged with trays of gourmet appetizers. The official office launch party had begun, and it felt like a declaration of independence. I walked toward the open bar, the surge of adrenaline starting to recede. I placed the presentation remote on a table and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server. I took deep, steadying breath. The launch was done. The truth was out. I had won. But that feeling of victory was short-lived. The consequences were already at the door. The driving rhythm of the music was shattered by the sound of a heavy glass door slamming open. The main entrance to the lobby flew open, crashing against the security stanchions with a sound like a gunshot. A gust of cold, rainy Seattle air swept in, rustling the napkins on the cocktail tables. The conversations nearest the door died instantly. A wave of silence rolled through the party, reaching the DJ, who smartly faded the music to nothing. Over 300 pairs of eyes turned to the wide-open doorway. Julian Hamilton was standing there. His bisque suit was immaculate, but his face was pale, glistening with sweat and sheer panic. His mother, Diana, stood beside him, clutching a cashmere wrap around herself. Her eyes darted around, taking in the huge crowd she had obviously been trying to avoid. Alex, his brother, lingered a few steps behind them, looking like he wished he could become invisible. The Hamiltons had arrived. The glass doors swung and slammed again. A blast of cold Seattle air rushed into the office, carrying the smell of damp pavement and an approaching storm off the sound. The sudden noise sliced through the room's warm, celebratory vibe. The DJ saw the scene unfolding and cut the music entirely, plunging the space into a tense, expectant quiet. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto the main entrance. Julian Hamilton was framed in the doorway. His $1,000 suit seemed absurdly out of place against the modern, minimalist decor of my startup. His breathing was shallow and fast. Beside him stood his mother, Diana. She wore a silk evening gown and an enormous fur, her jaw set with a rage that looked ancient. Hiding behind them was Alex, Julian's older brother, who was staring at his expensive shoes as if hoping for a divine intervention. But Diana never faltered. For 3 decades, she had dominated hospital fundraisers, political dinners, and country club meetings by always taking control and speaking with unquestioned power. She shrugged off her fur, dropping it into Alex's hands without looking at him, and marched toward the center of the office. The crowd of my friends, family, and investors parted like the sea. They weren't just giving her a path, they were creating an arena to watch the train wreck. I stood frozen by the presentation stage, the remote for the main screen still tight in my hand. I didn't take a single step toward her. In hostile negotiations, you never cede the high ground. You let your opponent burn through all their bluster, reveal their entire hand, and then you systematically dismantle their argument. Diana stopped about 10 feet away from me. Her gaze swept the room, taking in the food, the custom lighting, and the faces of her own relatives holding champagne flutes. She was assessing the jury. She took a breath, preparing to launch into her victim narrative. "Clara, this has gone quite far enough," Diana said. Her voice was crisp and loud. It was the voice of a woman used to making CEOs tremble. "I understand that you're disappointed. Weddings are emotional, I get that, but throwing a public tantrum and dragging our family to your little startup office is simply beneath you." She angled her body, turning to address the crowd. She was trying to flip them. She needed them to see her as the reasonable adult and me as the unhinged fiancé. "The Four Seasons had a bomb threat," Diana announced, pressing a hand to her chest in a performance of grave concern. It was a major security incident. The police were evacuating the entire city block. I spent all morning pulling every string I have to book us the main ballroom at the Olympic Hotel. I put my own reputation on the line to save this wedding. I tried to give you a beautiful and, more importantly, a safe venue. And instead of a thank you, Clara decides to behave like a child and destroy everything. She turned back to me, her chin raised in defiance. It was, I have to give it to her, an incredible performance. It had danger, a selfless hero, and a clear villain. In a different setting, a private room, it might have even worked. But Diana had made one critical error. She wasn't in a boardroom where her word was law. I raised the remote in my hand. My voice was completely steady. I didn't let a single ounce of emotion into my tone. That is an incredible story, Diana, I said. My voice, amplified by the office's speaker system, was calm and clear, but it does present a significant technical problem. I pressed a button on the remote. The massive presentation screen behind me flickered to life, displaying a network security log. I still have preferred vendor access to the hotel's internal servers, I explained. This is their security log for the entire day. No bomb threats, no police alerts. I clicked again. However, it does show a $40,000 wire transfer sent this morning from their events department directly to your son's brokerage account. So, was it a bomb threat, Diana, or a buyout? The silence that followed was absolute. Diana's perfect mask of confident outrage simply disintegrated. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She shot a panicked look at Julian, then back at the giant screen. The room started buzzing with hushed, angry whispers. A sharp gasp came from a group of my investors standing near the kombucha tap. You can't run a tech company on lies, and you can't get away with a scam when the other person is displaying the blockchain receipt. Alex lunged forward, trying to get between me and his mother. His face was blotchy and red with fury as he pointed a shaking finger at me. All his life, Alex was the screw-up Diana always bailed out. He clearly thought that would work here too. Turn off that screen, Alex hissed, desperate to contain the damage. Stop trying to humiliate my mother. She was trying to protect you. You retwisting a simple precaution into some wild conspiracy because you always need to be the victim. He was trying to gaslight me in front of 300 people. He was banking on my old habit of avoiding conflict to maintain the peace. He assumed I'd back down. I didn't. I am not the one humiliating your mother, Alex, I said into the microphone. She is handling that all by herself. And you re not defending her. You re just covering for the fact you needed my venue deposit to cover your margin call. The room absolutely erupted. It wasn't a shocked gasp. It was the loud, cynical laughter of people who see deals fall apart every single day. One of my board members, a venture capitalist from Silicon Valley, leaned forward. Sounds like you shorted the wrong stock, kid, he yelled. A wave of laughter and agreement rolled through my team. My own father, a man who has worked with his hands his entire life, just folded his arms. Go on back to your country club, he shouted. We don't have time for thieves here. The heckling was brutal. It completely erased Diana's authority. She looked around the office, finally understanding her social standing was worthless here. Her expensive dress and her charity board memberships were no defense against a digital paper trail displayed on a 20-foot screen. She had entered my space like a conquering general and was now just a common fraud exposed in the middle of a launch party. Julian took a slow step backward toward the doors, his gaze locked on the floor. He wanted out. He was just like all the Hamilton men gone at the first sign of a real fight. Alex spun around, glaring at his own family members in the crowd. His fists were clenched. He looked like a cornered animal, desperate to attack a story that was already public record. Diana opened her mouth to scream, to threaten lawsuits, to demand the deference she believed was her birthright. But she never got the words out. On the far side of the office, the crowd of guests began to move aside. A clear path formed straight down the middle of the room. Sophie Hamilton walked forward. She wore a sharp, tailored business suit, her heels making a steady, clicking sound on the concrete floor. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality. She didn't even glance at her fiancé, Julian. She didn't look at her future brother-in-law, Alex. She walked directly to me, holding an iPad in her hand, its screen glowing brightly in the dim party light. Sophie stopped right next to me. She spun around to face her mother-in-law. Catherine's gaze locked on the tablet, and for the first time all day, raw fear flashed in her eyes. The social assassination was done. The financial one was just starting. My cousin Sarah stood beside me on the cold concrete floor. She didn't look like someone caught in a bitter family feud. She looked like a CEO about to deliver a brutal quarterly loss to a hostile board. Her posture was ramrod straight, her face a perfect mask. Sarah was the head of compliance for Sterling Realty. It was the real estate empire Catherine ran like her own personal fiefdom. For years, Catherine thought putting her niece in charge of audits was a clever way to control her. She never grasped a simple truth of business. The person who checks the financial records holds all the power. Sarah didn't care about emotions or family loyalty. She cared about data, and data doesn't pick sides. She tapped the tablet screen. She didn't whisper a single word into the microphone. She didn't need to. She simply passed the device to me. I glanced down at the illuminated display. It was a digital statement for the Sterling family's primary corporate account. Highlighted in a sickly, aggressive yellow was a pending transfer from Thursday afternoon. The amount was exactly $25,000. The sender was listed as the historic estate in the Hamptons, my original wedding venue. My stomach twisted, not from heartbreak, but from pure shock at the sheer audacity of their crime. Venues don't just refund deposits to a random corporate entity. I paid that retainer from my own personal account. Banking regulations require refunds to return to the original source. Bypassing that kind of security measure requires deliberate fraud, meticulous planning, and forged paperwork. I swiped my finger across Sarah's screens, revealing the second exhibit. It was a PDF document. The email in the header was a generic address using my first and last name, followed by a random string of digits. I had never seen that email address in my entire life. The document itself was a formal request to reroute a payment. It instructed the venue to terminate my wedding contract and wire the refund to a completely different bank account due to a sudden grave family crisis. The account details on the form belonged to Sterling Realty, and on the digital signature line at the bottom, there was my name. It was signed in a looping cursive script that was a clumsy forgery of my own signature. Catherine didn't just make a threatening call to sabotage my wedding. She committed clear-cut identity theft. I looked up from the tablet's harsh light. Catherine was staring at the device in my hands. The powerful, untouchable matriarch was gone. In her place was a woman frantically calculating her legal exposure. I raised the microphone to my mouth again. As I was saying, I announced to the now silent gallery, my voice echoing off the exposed brick, Julian needed $25,000 to cover his gambling debts. What I didn't realize until this very moment was how his mother laundered him the money. I angled the tablet, showing the highlighted transaction to the first few rows. My cousin is the chief compliance officer for the Sterling family business, I stated, my voice clinical and detached. 3 days ago, she flagged an extremely irregular wire transfer that came into the corporate account. The funds were from my wedding venue in the Hamptons. The amount was for my exact deposit. Julian took a shaky step back, his polished dress shoes scraping the floor. To authorize this transfer, I went on, my gaze fixed on Catherine. My former mother-in-law created a fake email address impersonating me. She drafted a fraudulent change of payment authorization. She forged my signature on a legally binding financial document. She then submitted it across states to steal my personal funds. The quiet murmuring in the venue vanished completely. You can heckle people for being embarrassing or for petty squabbles. You meet evidence of corporate crime with a thick, uncomfortable silence. You crossed a very dangerous line today, Catherine, I said it, the sound system amplifying the cold fury in my voice. You went from being a controlling mother to a federal criminal. All the color drained from Catherine's face. Her skin took on a pasty, unwell shade of gray as the consequences of her actions finally hit her. She was in a room filled with 200 witnesses. I was holding irrefutable digital proof of her forgery. The story she concocted about a burst pipe wasn't just a pathetic lie to save her reputation. It was a weak, failing alibi for felony wire fraud. Julian stared at his mother in utter horror. He wanted a discreet bailout. He had asked her to fix his money problem. He never dreamed her solution would involve federal crimes. Julian was a venture capitalist. He knew the specific financial laws his mother had just broken. He knew that being implicated in identity theft and fraud meant the end of his career and potential prison time. His little attempt to conceal a gambling problem had just made him an accessory to a major crime. I lowered the tablet and passed it back to Sarah. She accepted it with a short, determined nod. I finally turned my attention to Julian. He was shaking. The confident, smug financier who had ordered me to behave on the phone less than an hour ago had disappeared. In his place was a man watching his entire future crumble into ash. I lifted my left hand. The 4-carat cushion-cut diamond felt like a block of ice on my finger. Its platinum setting was meant to symbolize our shared life and a bond of trust. Instead, it was just the first installment on a marriage built on a foundation of lies. I used my right hand to pinch the cold metal. I twisted it over my knuckle. I didn't throw it at him. I didn't cause a scene, flinging it across the room like a character in some cheap soap opera. Architects do not have tantrums. We resolve issues with logic and precision. Julian was standing next to an easel. On it were the architectural drawings for our dream home, a project I had poured my heart into. A half-empty glass of champagne was sitting on a table nearby. I took 3 slow, measured steps forward. The crowd was completely silent, parting to make a clear path for me. I came to a stop directly in front of Julian. He opened his mouth, probably to mumble some pitiful excuse, or maybe to beg for another chance. I never gave him the satisfaction of saying a word. I held the diamond ring up. I uncurled my fingers. The platinum ring made no noise. It dropped silently onto the thick architectural paper, landing directly over the master suite. It settled on the plans for a life we would never get to live. Consider this project terminated, I said. My voice was quiet, but the microphone carried the words to every corner of the gallery. You'll need this for your legal fees. Julian just stared down at the diamond sitting on the blueprints. He couldn't look at me. Marcus, his brother, who had been lurking in the background the whole time, suddenly sprang to life. He seized his mother's arm. He didn't check if she was all right. He just grabbed her expensive coat, hauling her toward the rear service exit. Catherine stumbled on the hem of her designer gown, her face down, trying to avoid the dozens of smartphones now documenting her humiliating retreat. Julian turned and robotically followed his family. He shoved his way through the heavy steel doors, disappearing into the chilly Seattle night. The doors clicked shut, the sound echoing in the now silent venue. The Sterlings were gone. I turned to face my friends and family. The atmosphere in the room was electric. I made eye contact with the DJ. He was watching me from his station, his hand hovering over the controls, waiting for a cue. I gave him one quick, decisive nod. He slammed the volume fader up. A deep, pulsing bass line erupted from the sound system. The tension in the room instantly broke. A massive cheer went up from the guests. My father was already opening another bottle of champagne. Julian's own cousins were making a beeline for the bar, shaking their heads and laughing in disbelief. The caterers emerged from the kitchen, holding new trays of appetizers for everyone. The party was on again, but now it was fueled by a wild, celebratory energy. I walked over to my best friend Olivia. We didn't need to speak. We simply grabbed 2 glasses of Prosecco, clinked them together, and watched the celebration begin. Monday arrived with a brisk wind and a sharp blue sky. I walked into my architecture studio at 8 a.m., set down my coffee, and booted up my computer. I began reviewing the plans for a new city museum. The design of a skyline never stops, and neither does social media. While I was taking Sunday to decompress, the digital record of my cancelled wedding had gone massively viral. The fallout was immediate and entirely digital. Our photographer, as promised, sent the unedited video of my speech to a private online group for Seattle event professionals on Saturday night. It was meant as a warning to other vendors about working with the Sterling family. But someone in that group recognized the raw, explosive drama. They recorded their screen and posted it to TikTok on Sunday. By Monday, it had 10 million views. It was obvious why the algorithm pushed it so hard. People enjoy gossip, but they absolutely adore a well-executed takedown. The clip showed a bride in a wedding dress inside a trendy industrial space, calmly and systematically ruining her wealthy mother-in-law with documented evidence of bank fraud. There was no screaming, there was no melodrama, just a cold, methodical presentation of facts. The video's final moment was the perfect viral ending. It showed me placing a 4-carat diamond ring on the blueprints of a cancelled home and telling my ex-fiancé to save it for his lawyers. The consequences hit the Sterling family before the stock market even opened. Eleanor Caldwell's world was built on a flawless, elite reputation. She thought her old Chicago money and Gold Coast penthouse made her invincible. She woke up Monday to learn social credibility can vanish in an instant. Once the story hit the society columns, her closest friends cut her off completely. The elite have zero tolerance for public humiliation, especially involving financial fraud. The same women who praised her at a gallery last week were now ignoring her calls. She was quietly removed from the museum's foundation board. Her carefully curated image as a design powerhouse was now a caricature in the papers, and the social shunning was just the beginning. The financial blow landed an hour later. At 9 a.m., the events team at a prestigious River North Gallery processed its charges. They billed $50,000 to Eleanor's corporate account. Eleanor immediately called the director to fight the charge. She claimed the event was a catastrophe and had been cancelled. The director reminded her that her family drama didn't negate a legally binding contract. The caterer had bought food for 200 people. The staff had all been paid. The gallery was taking the money from her account, period. Eleanor was hemorrhaging money and her social status was burning to the ground. While she was battling the gallery, Leo was learning the real cost of his desperate gambles. Leo was a rising star at a top real estate development firm in the Loop. In that world, your reputation is the only currency that matters. A developer has to have a perfect ethical record to handle investor capital. By 10 that morning, the firm's senior partners had all seen the scandalous column. It had been shared all over the industry's private forums. The article didn't just describe a messy family argument. It laid out in detail forgery and financial fraud committed to secure a $25,000 bridge loan. Worse, it proved Leo used that fraudulent loan to hide losses on his failing condo project. Leo was summoned to a partners meeting before he even finished his coffee. A development firm can't keep a partner publicly accused of forging documents against his own fiancée. The risk was simply too great. He was suspended on the spot, pending a formal investigation. They told him to hand over his laptop and his key card. His career was dissolving before his eyes, destroyed by the very lies he thought would fix everything. While they were drowning in their self-made disaster, I began my countermove. I had endured 4 years of Eleanor's passive-aggressive remarks and Leo's casual condescension. I stayed with him only because I was gathering proof, waiting for the right moment to live without a messy, drawn-out legal battle. The complete public implosion of the Caldwell family was the perfect opportunity. With Eleanor fighting the gallery and Leo getting suspended, no one was paying attention to me. They were too busy battling a 5-alarm blaze to notice the single match I was about to light. On Monday afternoon, I made my own quiet move. I didn't pack a bag, I just opened my laptop. I used their public scandal as the perfect, undeniable reason to escape their toxic world. I didn't bother with the final argument. I just closed the book on them, leaving Leo to deal with his family's wreckage by himself. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, my cell phone started buzzing. It was Leo. I didn't pick up. The calls went straight to voicemail. He tried 4 times in 1 hour. The transcribed voicemails appeared on my screen, letting me read his growing desperation without having to hear his voice. His tone changed with every message, tracking the breakdown of a man who had lost all control. The first message was pure damage control. He demanded I post a statement calling the whole thing a misunderstanding. He claimed I was destroying his reputation and career over a simple cash problem. The second message was a desperate bargain. He offered to return my $25,000 if I just call him back and talk to his partners. He needed an alibi. By the fourth message, the arrogance had vanished. I could almost read the status. He was begging. He begged me to help undo the damage. He swore he had no idea his mother planned to commit fraud. He said he just wanted to pay off his investors and buy our historic home so we could start fresh. He was a liar. He knew exactly what he was doing when he let me find the voided contract in our inbox. He knew what was happening when he complained about his expensive new shoes while I stared at our lost dream. I sat there at my desk, rereading his final text message, and I felt nothing. Pity is for people who suffer bad luck. Leo was a victim of his own terrible choices. He gambled away his own money. He gambled away our future home and he lost. Now he expected me to cover his losses just to save his own skin. I deleted the entire thread. Then I opened a new email. The public shame Eleanor was feeling was just a side effect of going viral. The suspension Leo faced was a consequence of his own actions. I hadn't caused that. They were the natural result of their secrets getting out. But the stolen down payment was a direct attack on my personal finances. It was time to settle the score. I typed Eleanor's email address into the to line. I added Leo's right below it. Then I added my corporate lawyer's email address to the CC line. I attached the digital bank record showing the fraudulent wire transfer. I attached the PDF of the authorization form with my forged signature. The proof was perfect and ready to send. The court of public opinion had passed its sentence, but the final checkmate was mine. I didn't schedule some big meeting. Dramatic showdowns in glass boardrooms are for television, not real life. When you hold all the cards, you don't need to be in the same room. You just deliver the terms of their surrender. I sat at my desk and opened a new email. In the recipient field, I put Eleanor S. address, then Leo's. In the CC field, I added my attorney, Mr. Roth, who specializes in financial fraud. Then I clicked the paperclip icon and attached 3 separate files. The first attachment was the bank statement. My friend Clara had pulled it, clearly showing the $25,000 transfer into the Caldwell Design Group's business account. The second was the fraudulent transfer authorization PDF, showing my perfectly copied signature. The third was a statement from Leo S. development project that Clara also acquired, proving its massive debt, the clear motive for the theft. The email itself was short. It had no exclamation points. It didn't offer any moralizing or lectures about my broken heart. I just laid out the cold, hard facts. I stated that on the morning of Tuesday, March 10th, Eleanor Caldwell committed identity theft and federal wire fraud to steal funds from my personal savings account. I noted that Leo Caldwell was a knowing accomplice to this financial crime, which was used to cover his real estate project's losses. I gave them their options. They had one of two choices. They could wire the full sum of $25,000 back to my account by 5 p.m. that day. Or, if the money wasn't there, my lawyer would forward the entire file to the district attorney and file a civil suit. I didn't sign it with "sincerely." I just typed my name. I moved the cursor over send and clicked. The window was gone. It was out of my hands. I spent the rest of the day researching historic city blueprints. The difference between my quiet, orderly office and the chaos surely erupting across town was staggering. I could just picture Eleanor in her perfect Gold Coast penthouse, staring at her screen, realizing her social connections couldn't erase a digital paper trail. I imagined Leo sitting in his condo, suspended from his development firm, watching his last escape hatch slam shut. The clock on my computer screen clicked over to 4, then 4:30. The afternoon sun streamed through my office window, casting long shadows across my desk. I didn't pace the floor. I didn't check my bank account again and again. A well-executed plan just requires a bit of patience. You state your terms, then you simply wait for the other side to meet them. At 4:45, my phone buzzed on the wood of my desk. I picked it up. The screen lit up with a notification from my bank. A new transaction had just posted to my account. The text was in bright, satisfying green. The amount was $25,000. The sender was listed as the Caldwell Design Group. The memo line was completely blank. It was a silent, forced surrender. The money I had earned was back where it belonged. The debt was paid. 5 minutes later, the phone buzzed a second time. This time, it was a text straight from Julian. He couldn't stand the silence. People who spend their whole lives dodging blame can't handle it when you actually close the door. They have to get the last word in, trying to frame their weakness as some kind of strength. I opened it. Just one sentence. I was just trying to protect our family. I read it again. It's the classic line of every spineless enabler. For Julian, protecting the family meant prioritizing his mother's meltdowns over my sanity. It meant draining our accounts to hide his failures so he wouldn't have to face one difficult conversation. Peace in that household was just the absence of his mother's yelling. It was a fragile truce bought with my money and my well-being. I hit the reply button. I didn't write a novel. I didn't list every trail or explain how much he'd let me down. I just typed the one thing that would shatter his last pathetic excuse. You didn't want peace, Julian. You just wanted a quieter war. I pressed send. I saw the bubble turn green. A confirmation it went through. Then I tapped the icon next to his contact. I scrolled down to the very bottom of the screen. I selected the option to block his number. A prompt asked if I was sure, warning me that all future calls and texts from him would be blocked. I hit confirm. Julian was gone from my digital world. I did the exact same for his mother, Catherine, and then for his brother, Mark. I severed every single connection. The war was finally over. Time is a strange thing. It has a way of making the picture crystal clear. When you finally remove toxic people from your life, the quiet that comes after feels unnatural. You're always waiting for the next disaster to strike. But eventually, that silence becomes your new peace. 6 months passed. The biting Chicago winter finally broke, melting into a bright, warm afternoon in May. The ice was gone, Lake Michigan was sparkling, and the entire city felt like it was finally breathing again. I was sitting at a little cafe table on a sun-soaked stretch of the river walk. The spot overlooked the water, just a stone's throw from the grand ballroom where our wedding was supposed to be held. The air was a mix of fresh coffee and the clean scent of the lake. I had on a light jacket, my work laptop resting on the chair beside me. I'd just been promoted to head of Midwest Logistics. Apparently, how I navigated that supply chain crisis in March had caught the eye of the board. A shadow crossed my table. I glanced up. It was Chloe, smiling. She looked 10 pounds lighter. She was wearing a stylish pantsuit and sunglasses, and she just radiated a new kind of calm confidence. Her divorce from Mark was nearly done. She had used the family's spectacular implosion as the perfect opportunity to finally break free. She walked away with her company shares, her career, and most importantly, her peace of mind. She slid into the chair opposite me and flagged down a server. We ordered 2 flutes of crisp, cold Prosecco. We didn't waste our time talking about her ex-husband's family. We didn't rehash Catherine's public downfall or Julian's sad attempt to land a job at a smaller company. Their world was no longer our problem. They were just ghosts from a past life, a case file that was permanently closed. The server brought our drinks. Tiny bubbles raced up the sides of the glasses, catching the afternoon light. Chloe raised her flute. "To new chapters," she said, her voice clear and strong, "and to building your own boat." I lifted my glass and met hers with a clean, bright chime. "To building your own boat," I echoed. I took a sip and gazed out at the river. A massive freight barge was powering through the channel, pushing against the current with a slow, undeniable force. I thought about the useless key to the penthouse. I thought about the bitter wind off the lake, the ironclad prenup, and the sickening drop in my stomach when I realized the life I'd built was actually a cage. People will tell you a broken engagement is a tragedy. They expect you to cry over the wasted invitations, the forfeited deposits, and your relationship status. But that's not how you move forward. When a train comes to a washed-out bridge, you don't just sit and wait. You find a new route. You lay new track. Sometimes the greatest gift a toxic family can give you is showing you the exit. It forces you to remember you have the map, the resources, and the guts to build your own damn city. Welcome to Cherry Vengeance, presenting our second original story for you to enjoy. Join us for an incredible story from a daughter who chose strategy over sentiment, packed with drama and stunning reversals. Sit back and enjoy a tale of quiet revenge, delivered with surgical precision and a truly unforgettable ending. My mother's voice boomed across the SF MoMA Patrons Gala, loud enough for her entire table to hear her little speech on parenting. "We had to set financial boundaries with Claire," she declared, her tone dripping with the fake sorrow popular among the San Francisco elite. "It's the only way she'll ever learn to be part of this family." The polite conversation died. A group of women in designer dresses turned to look directly at me. Has a narcissistic family member ever tried to shame you in public just to make themselves look like a hero? Tell me your age and how you handled it in the comments below. Welcome to Cherry Vengeance, where we serve the truth and watch karma handle the rest. My father, Richard, stood beside my mother, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. He gave the women a pained, knowing look. "It was for her own good," he added. "Bryce is launching his new NFT marketplace, a huge venture, and Claire refused to show any family loyalty. We simply can't reward that kind of selfishness." I was standing 5 feet away, sipping sparkling water. I said nothing. I didn't even flinch. I didn't point out that Bryce's marketplace was a half-baked idea built entirely on their desperate hope for a quick payday. I just let them have their performance. They craved an audience. They needed these Silicon Valley power players to see them as the devoted, long-suffering parents of an ungrateful 32-year-old daughter. My mother met my gaze and offered a tiny smile. It was sharp and triumphant, meant to signal her victory. She thought she'd won because I wasn't causing a scene in front of her donors. She mistook my composure for a defeat, but my silence was a loaded gun. What my parents conveniently left out of their story was one very critical piece of paper. 4 years earlier, their investment firm had nearly collapsed. A series of disastrous bets on crypto startups meant bankruptcy was knocking at their door. To save them from losing the very social standing they were flaunting tonight, I had used my own assets and reputation to become the sole personal guarantor for their corporate entity, Golden Gate Ventures. They hadn't set boundaries with me, they hadn't taught me a thing. They had been living on my credit for 4 straight years. Every fundraiser, every leased German sports car, every check they wrote to fund Bryce's pipe dreams was backed by my personal financial guarantee. I was a partner at a VC firm. I managed billion-dollar funds for a living. I knew exactly how fragile their entire world was. I set my glass down on a passing server's tray. I looked at my mother, then my father, and gave them one slow, deliberate nod. "Have a wonderful night," I said. Then I turned and walked out of the gala, leaving them to bask in the spotlight. I crossed the grand, echoing hall into the quiet atrium. The sound of my heels clicked on the polished stone floors. I stopped near the code check, pulled my phone from my purse, and unlocked the screen. I didn't need a public fight. I just needed to open my bank's corporate portal. I pulled up the registry of accounts. Golden Gate Ventures was right there, displaying a debt-to-asset ratio that was absolutely terrifying. I clicked into the account security settings, straight to the guarantor page. I didn't hesitate for a second. I started the process to remove my name from their multi-million-dollar loan. The screen flashed. Just like that, the liability was gone. They wanted to talk about cutting me out? Fine. I was about to show them what it felt like to have your lifeline severed. My office, 30 floors above the Miami skyline, was dead quiet at dawn. I liked it that way. No interruptions, no analysts begging for 5 minutes, just the soft hum of the servers and the sun hitting Biscayne Bay. I settled into my chair, the monitors flickered to life, and I poured my first coffee of the day. I wasn't angry about the charity ball last night. In my line of work, anger is a rookie mistake. It makes you sloppy. I live and die by precision. I pulled up the central account for the Kensington Trust. My parents loved that name. It sounded like old money, like something that could never fail. But the balance sheet told the truth. It was a house of cards. And for the last 4 years, my personal wealth was the only thing holding it all together. When I first agreed to be the guarantor, it was just a technicality. My father swore it was a short-term fix. He called it a formality, just to secure a 90-day bridge loan. But I knew he was lying. That loan wasn't a bridge, it was a prayer. I signed the papers anyway because I was 28 and thought if I could just save them, I'd finally earn their respect. I was wrong. All I earned was their resentment. You see, when people depend on you to survive, they start hating you because you're a living reminder of their failure. So they rewrote history. They told everyone they had cut me off, making me the villain while they burned through my credit to keep up the facade. They leased my brother Liam a German sports sedan through the company, calling it a business expense. They threw cocktail parties at the country club and called them networking events. Every single one of those extravagant purchases was a fraudulent charge on an account that I was personally guaranteeing. I clicked over to the guarantor authorization form online. The screen displayed my name, my social security number, and my pristine credit score, all shackled to their mountain of debt. They actually thought they had cast me aside. They believed their own lie because my father spent his whole life bending reality to suit his ego. When my brother Liam barely graduated from college, my parents bought him a penthouse loft to inspire his vision. When I passed my forensic accounting exams and got a job at a top firm, they said I was playing it safe. Liam was the big thinker. I was just the help. But big thinkers don't pay the bills. The help does. I moved the cursor over the revoke personal guarantee button. I didn't hesitate. I felt no final pang of guilt. I just clicked. A security prompt appeared, asking for my thumbprint on the biometric pad. I pressed my thumb down. The screen flashed a green check mark confirming the action. With that one move, Sterling Legacy Group lost its only financial lifeline. The entire corporate line of credit was frozen, effective immediately. The full debt was now callable. The oxygen was cut off. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing client accounts and approving wire transfers. At 10:15 sharp, my private line rang. It wasn't a client. The caller ID showed Marcus Vance. Marcus was my parents' CPA, a man so stressed he always sounded like he was about to miss a connecting flight. I picked up on the second ring. "Good morning, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Chloe," he sputtered, sounding completely winded. "I am so sorry to bother you at work, but there's a huge red flag on the holding company's primary account. I need you to phone the bank and authorize an emergency override." I kept my eyes on my monitor. "What kind of red flag, Marcus?" "A full rejection," he said, his voice cracking with pure panic. 2 major payments were just kicked back. One was a $16,000 charge for your mother's country club renewal. The other was the lease payment on Liam's new sedan. The bank is reporting the account's collateral is suddenly insufficient. They're freezing all activity. Just tell them it's some kind of system error. I took a long, slow sip of my tea. "It's not an error, Marquis. I withdrew my personal guarantee this morning. That account is no longer my responsibility." There was a thick, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could just hear the sound of traffic outside his office. "Chloe," he finally said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper, "you can't do that. Without your credit as collateral, the bank will see your father's actual financial position. They'll run the real numbers." "I know," I replied. "That's precisely the point." Marcus started to babble, his professional demeanor completely gone. "You don't understand. They have zero liquid assets. They leveraged the lake house to finance Liam's last startup, which folded 6 months ago. They are running on nothing. If the bank calls in their commercial loans today, they will be wiped out by tomorrow. The entire thing will just vanish." I listened as he started to breathe heavily into the phone. My parents paid Marcus a small fortune to paint their finances like a masterpiece. But even the best artist in the world can't conjure money from thin air. My brother Liam spent his 20s failing upwards. He launched a series of lifestyle brand companies, things like curated travel blogs and artisan coffee subscriptions. Every single one lost a fortune. And every single time, my father would quietly absorb the losses through the main family account. Dad never saw Liam's incompetence as a problem. He called it finding his path. He subsidized Liam's entire adult life because admitting his golden child was a flop meant admitting his own legacy was a house of cards. While he was finding his path, I was in cubicles becoming a forensic accountant. I learned how to trace dirty money, dismantle shell corporations, and find the truth buried in a balance sheet. I built my career knowing exactly what happens when the fantasy implodes. "Marcus," I said, cutting through his panicked excuses, "you're the accountant, not mine. You have a legal obligation to inform your clients their line of credit has been terminated. I suggest you call my father and tell him the news." "But he'll fire me," Marcus pleaded. "Then you'll have a front row seat for the collapse," I told him. "Chloe," he begged, "if this credit line gets called, the bank will seize everything. The payroll for Liam's staff is going to bounce. You have to put your name back on the guarantee just for a few days." "I don't have to do anything," I said. The agreement clearly stated I could withdraw my support at any time, for any reason. I filed the paperwork this morning. The bank has already confirmed it. It's done. But your family, she started. My family, I interrupted, made it perfectly clear last night that I am no longer part of their financial equation. I'm simply giving them what they asked for. I'm embracing the financial freedom they were screaming about. Good luck, Marcus. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel happy. I just centered my keyboard on my desk and opened the next client file. The trap was now set. All I had to do was wait for them to step in it. The morning passed slowly. I authorized a few asset freezes and reviewed a fraud analysis. I knew exactly how this was going to go. Marcus would call my father. My father would yell at Marcus. Then Dad would log into the bank's website, see the frozen account, and realize it was real. Sheer terror would set in. But my father wouldn't call me. His pride is made of stone. He would never ever stoop to asking me for help. He would send his enforcer. He would send the one person he believed could still bully me into submission. At exactly 1:30 p.m., the glass doors to my firm slid open. I heard the frantic, angry footsteps on the polished stone floor before I even saw him. Liam. He stormed right past the reception desk. He didn't even acknowledge the security guard. He marched down the hall, making a beeline for my office. He wore a designer suit that, ironically, had been paid for with my money. His face was a blotchy, furious shade of crimson. He had the look of a spoiled prince who just discovered his allowance was cut off. And he was mad about the inconvenience. He didn't knock. He shoved my office door open so hard it banged against the wall, leaving a mark. He just stood there in the doorway, panting like an angry animal, clutching a printout from his bank. Liam was a mess, a crumpled bank notice crushed in his hand. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and he was out of breath. He had blown through the lobby like a hurricane of wounded entitlement. And standing right behind him was Isabel. She was wearing a chic navy pantsuit, her posture flawless. But I could see the fatigue around her eyes, the exhaustion of a woman who spends her life managing a man-child. I genuinely liked Isabel. She was a top brand manager for a major advertising firm. She knew the difference between image and reality. She married Liam 3 years ago, thinking she was marrying into the stable, respected sterling family fortune. My parents sold her a total fantasy. They painted Liam as a misunderstood genius on the verge of his big break. They threw huge parties and talked about the great sterling legacy. Isabel bought it all, because why wouldn't she? The rich couple pouring vintage champagne had no reason to tell her their entire world was propped up by their daughter's credit score. Liam slapped his hand flat on my desk. "Fix it," he demanded. His voice echoed down the quiet corridor, causing several junior associates to look up from their computers. "Fix this entire mess right now, Chloe." I didn't stand up. I just moved my mouse, saving the document I was working on. "There's nothing to fix, Liam." He paced into my office, waving the paper in his hand. "Marcus just called me, losing his mind. He said you pulled the guarantee on the corporate account. My lease payment on the Porsche was just declined. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Having the dealership tell you your funds are insufficient. Put it back. You're going to torpedo Dad's entire company with this little tantrum." Isabel stepped forward then. Her intelligent eyes analyzed my calm demeanor, my organized desk. "Liam told me there was some kind of paperwork mix-up with the family trust," she said, her voice even but tense. "He said you accidentally froze the main capital accounts." I turned my full attention to my sister-in-law. "Isabel, Liam is lying to you. There is no family trust. There's a shell company that's been running on empty for years, and I was the only thing keeping it afloat. This morning I resigned. The bank is closed." Liam lunged toward my desk, his face turning an even darker shade of purple. "Shut up," he hissed. "You have no idea what you're doing. You're an accountant. You don't understand venture capital. I turned back to my monitor, ignoring him. Big ideas need capital, Chloe, I said, clicking through spreadsheets. You don't have any. Let me show you what your brother's genius looks like on paper. I swung the huge 40-inch screen around to face them. My forensic analysis software was already running. I hit a key. A tangled web of accounts and transactions lit up the screen in red and green. I walked Naomi through the whole mess, pointing to the screen as her eyes traced the flowchart. I showed her where the money went. Here's my trust, acting as the seed money. And here it flows out to his shell corporation and then to Harrison as projects. It was all there, undeniable. 75 grand for some NFT art that turned out to be worthless. 150,000 for a beta test trip to Aspen that produced nothing. 50,000 on investor dinners that were just his bar tabs at private clubs. The rock-solid financial security she thought she had was nothing but a house of cards, and that was just his business. Now, look at this last part, I said quietly. Harrison saw what was coming and tried to step in front of her. That's enough, Chloe, he snapped. Naomi moved around him without a glance, her eyes fixed on the display. Don't you dare touch me, she said, her voice dangerously low. She leaned in. I opened the final folder. It was a credit card statement, a black Amex with an insane credit limit. The account was opened 6 months ago, in her name. She saw her own social security number. She saw her signature, but it was a clumsy fake. And then she saw the charges. Thousands for a penthouse suite at the Grand America Hotel. Lavish dinners for 2 at 5-star restaurants. And then the last charge, $40,000 from a luxury jeweler. The date was their wedding anniversary, but the diamond watch on the receipt was not the one he'd given her. Naomi stopped breathing for a moment. Her expression turned from confusion to pure ice. She finally got it. The man she married wasn't just a failure. He was a thief. And he was a cheat. Naomi, Harrison started, his voice cracking. He put his hands up, trying to explain. It was just a bridge loan. Dad said it was fine. We were going to pay it all back when the next round of funding came in. It was a temporary thing. Naomi didn't even turn to look at him. She didn't yell. She just folded her arms, pulled out her phone, and unlocked it with a sharp tap. Her face was a frozen mask of absolute fury. What are you doing? Harrison asked, his voice shrinking to a pathetic squeak. Naomi's fingers just flew across the screen. I'm on the phone with my bank's fraud division, she said. And after I freeze every single asset that has my name on it, I'm calling my lawyer. Then I'm having the locks on our house changed. She snapped the phone shut, turned, and walked right out of my office. She never once looked back. Her heels made sharp, angry clicks on the hardwood floor, the sound echoing down the hallway until it faded. Harrison just stood there, completely floored. He stared at the empty doorway, then back at me, his face a mix of shock and rage. He came in here expecting me to back down, to do what he said. Instead, he watched his whole life get dismantled in less than 3 minutes. He jabbed a trembling finger at me. You think you're so smart, he hissed, his voice a low, desperate whisper. You think one frozen account stops anything? Dad isn't going to stand for this. He has other resources. Real estate. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. He spun around and stormed out, almost running to catch his wife, who was already long gone. I just stood there in the quiet of my office. I knew exactly what real estate he meant, and I knew my father was about to step into a trap much worse than a frozen bank account. 2 days passed after Harrison's tantrum in my office. The fallout was quiet, but it was happening. Naomi had officially started the divorce proceedings, and my parents were suddenly faced with the fact that they were completely broke. I didn't gloat. I just went back to work. It was Thursday morning, and I was in my firm's conference room going over a property dispute with our legal team. My phone was face down on the polished wood table. At exactly 9:40 a.m., The screen lit up with a silent notification. I flipped it over. A red flag icon. It was an automated alert from the Utah County Property Record System. Long before all this family drama, I learned to be very careful. I had every single property connected to my social security number registered with the county's notification system. Anytime a document was filed, updated, or even queried, I got an immediate, secure alert. I tapped the message. A menu appeared showing a new secondary mortgage application was pending. The property was a cabin up in Park City. My heart rate didn't even tick up. I just calmly picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. I scanned the loan details while my colleague talked about zoning laws. That cabin was a relic from my parents' pretend wealthy days. They bought it a decade ago as a status symbol, not a real asset. They throw lavish winter parties and boast about their mountain home to their country club friends, but they conveniently forgot to pay the property taxes. 5 years ago, the county issued a final foreclosure warning. They were weeks away from losing it in a tax auction, so I stepped in and cleaned up their mess. I paid the entire delinquent tax bill out of my own pocket. In return, I had my father sign a quitclaim deed, transferring 100% of the title into my name. I filed it, secured it, and I've been paying the upkeep ever since. My parents, however, have a remarkable talent for forgetting details. They still called it the family cabin. They honestly thought my name on the title was just a legal loophole to shield the property from their creditors. They forgot that a court deed is not a suggestion, it is the law. The alert on my phone showed that a new loan was being processed. Someone was trying to take out $200,000 against the property's equity. I checked the lender's name. It wasn't a standard bank. It was a hard money lender, the kind that works exclusively online. They target desperate people, offering fast cash at punishing interest rates. They rarely dig into the details unless their system flags something suspicious. My father was clearly desperate. The company money was cut off. Harrison was broke. The club was sending past due notices. Gerald needed cash, and he needed it yesterday. So he found some predatory lender online, entered the cabin's information, and hit submit. The portal showed an electronic signature right there on the application, my signature. He had forged it, thinking this online lender would wire the money before anyone caught on. He assumed the internet would hide his crime. I put my coffee mug down. The average person would have called their dad, screaming. They would have threatened legal action and started a huge, ugly family war. But I knew better than that. Getting emotional is a liability in a legal battle. I waited for the meeting to finish, gathered my things, and walked back to my private office. I closed the door and sat at my desk. I didn't even think about calling my father. I went straight to the lender's website and found their company staff list. I located the direct number for their underwriting division. Before calling, I drafted a quick email. I attached a high-resolution scan of my driver's license, my official notary's certificate, and the recorded deed proving I was the sole owner of the Park City property. I included a formal declaration that I had not authorized any such loan. Then I clicked send. Next, I dialed the number for the underwriting team. A man answered, identifying himself as a senior risk manager. I introduced myself using my full professional title. I'm a senior escrow officer with a firm in downtown Salt Lake City, I said, my voice perfectly calm. You're currently processing a loan for $200,000 on a property in Park City. The applicant used a forged signature. I am the legal owner of that property, and I'm flagging this as identity theft and potential wire fraud. The underwriter went completely silent. These lenders operate in a gray zone, but they are terrified of federal offenses. Wire fraud involves the FBI. The man cleared his throat, his casual tone now gone. Ma'am, we will stop the payment immediately and forward this to our fraud investigation team. Wait, I said, Don't just deny it. If you reject the application, he'll just move on to another lender and try the same thing. I want you to put the application on a specific hold. Flag it for pending physical verification. Then send an automated email to the applicant saying the digital signature is insufficient for a loan of this amount. Tell him underwriting requires a wet ink signature, notarized in person, to release the funds. The manager was quiet for a second, seeing the strategy. He understood the beautiful simplicity of the trap. He promised to fix the paperwork, and I hung up, leaning back in my drafting chair. I had just given my own father enough rope to hang himself. He'd log into his business account, thinking the problem was solved. Instead, he defined a hard rejection. He'd see the notice and realize his forged e-signature was useless. He needed a physical copy. He needed my actual signature. But he was far too proud to admit what he'd done. He would never confess to loan fraud. He'd try to manipulate me. He would arrange a meeting, pretend the guarantee was just some minor formality, and try to pressure me into signing it. He really thought he could fool a licensed architect with a cheap suit and a pathetic smile. Not even an hour later, my office phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's name. Eleanor only called me during work hours when she was running interference for my father. I let it ring twice before I answered, preparing myself for the next scene in their production. Her voice came through the speaker, dripping with the fake warmth she reserved for charity galas and press interviews. She asked about my new project, as if her husband hadn't just committed a felony using my credit. She suggested we clear the air over this silly misunderstanding. She proposed dinner at a high-end restaurant downtown, famous for its privacy and river views. I knew it was an ambush. My parents never paid for an expensive dinner unless they wanted something that cost infinitely more than the meal itself. I accepted her invitation because avoiding a trap is never as fun as walking right into it and taking it apart piece by piece. I got to the restaurant at 7 o'clock sharp. The place was sleek and modern, smelling of money and expensive gin. A hostess led me past a glowing floor-to-ceiling wine display to a secluded booth in the back. My parents were already there. Marcus was in his favorite power suit. Eleanor was wearing her signature pearls. But they had a guest. Sitting with them was a man in his late 50s who looked completely out of place, surrounded by all the chrome and dark leather. He was wearing a drab, brownish tie made of some cheap, shiny fabric and a jacket that looked too tight in the shoulders. He seemed nervous and sat ramrod straight in his seat. My father stood up, forcing a wide, politician smile. "Chloe," he said, gesturing to the stranger. "Thank you for coming. We've asked Mr. Davies to join us. He's a business consultant who helps mediate tricky financial matters, and we thought a neutral third party would be beneficial." I slid into the booth and sized the man up. Mr. Davies was no consultant. He was a bottom-feeder notary. My father spent his entire career surrounding himself with men just like him. My father never hired A-list lawyers or accountants for his shadir ventures. He always found the desperate ones, professionals willing to bend the rules for a fast, quiet payday. Mr. Davies had the distinct look of a man who'd put his official stamp on anything you put in front of him, no questions asked. A server arrived. My mother ordered a ridiculously expensive bottle of Cabernet. I just had sparkling water with lime. As soon as he left, my mother began her performance. She leaned in, her diamond rings catching the light. "We just want to move past this awful situation, darling," she said, her voice filled with practiced sincerity. "Your father is under an immense amount of pressure. Families bicker, but we can't let a simple document tear us apart. We need to fix this. We just need you to cooperate and help us correct a tiny little clerical error." I said nothing. I just waited for the real reason they dragged me here. My father finally cleared his throat and took over. The financing for the new tower development has hit a procedural snag, he explained, dropping the whole emotional performance. The lender requires your signature on a guarantee to release the funds. It's a formality. Mr. Davis is here to witness it, so we can all just enjoy dinner and move on. My father reached into his blazer and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. He passed it to his so-called consultant. Davis took the document, smoothing it out on the crisp white linen. He pulled a heavy, self-inking notary stamp from his briefcase and set it beside the bread plate. He clicked a cheap plastic pen and laid it down right next to the signature line. I didn't touch the paper. I just leaned forward, reading the text upside down. In my career as an architect, I've reviewed thousands of contracts. I recognized this format instantly. It was not a standard procedural form. It was an unlimited personal guarantee and a poorly drafted one. If I signed that paper, I would be legally responsible for my father's entire multi-million-dollar business loan. I'd be pledging every asset I owned. This document wasn't a formality. It was designed to erase his crime and transfer all of the risk directly to me. It was a financial bomb, disguised as a peace offering. My mother took a long, slow sip of her Cabernet. Over the rim of her glass, her eyes were hard, cold, and expectant. She thought I'd cave under the pressure and sign it to avoid a public scene. Instead, I picked up my butter knife. I pressed the flat of the knife against the edge of the guarantee. I pushed the document back across the table until it stopped right in front of the notary. I looked directly at the man in the cheap suit. "Mr. Davis," I said, my voice low and calm, "before we proceed, I have one or two procedural questions for you." Davis blinked, looking from my father back to me. "Procedural questions?" he repeated. "Yes," I said. "I'm curious about your liability insurance. Are you currently bonded to notarize commercial guarantees valued at over $10 million? Also, does your official log require a thumbprint for identity confirmation in this state, or do you just stamp whatever my father pays you to?" The blood instantly drained from the man's face. He was used to intimidating people who didn't understand the fine print. He was not prepared to be questioned on state notary regulations by a licensed architect. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My father jumped in, his friendly mask slipping. "Stop playing these childish games, Chloe," he snapped. "Mr. Davis is a licensed professional. Just sign the document so the bank releases the money." I kept my eyes locked on the notary. A licensed professional would know that you cannot legally witness a signature obtained under duress, I said evenly. I wonder what the Illinois State Bar would think about a notary facilitating a coerced signature on a fraudulent guarantee. Mr. Davis' air's panic quickly morphed into defensive anger. He puffed out his chest, trying to look imposing for the man who was paying his fee. "Listen, lady," Davis sneered, dropping the professional act. "I don't care about your family issues. I was hired to witness you sign a paper. The bank is waiting. If you refuse to sign right now, I'll record it as a formal refusal in my journal. That will tie up this entire project in legal red tape indefinitely. Don't waste my time." He shoved the contract back at me, jabbing his pen at the signature line. He really thought the threat of a bureaucratic delay would bully me into signing. He believed his cheap little stamp gave him actual power. I looked at the pen, at his smug expression. Then I reached into my handbag. I didn't raise my voice or react to the manufactured outrage from the man across the table. Mr. Davis thought his stamp made him the authority here. He didn't understand our roles. A notary is just a witness. The person who actually understands the contract is the one in control. I pulled out my smartphone. I didn't bother with a search engine. I went right to the Illinois State Licensing Portal. All professional registries are public records if you know where to look. I typed his full name into the search bar. The database returned his file in less than 2 seconds. I didn't need to read the details to see the disciplinary actions flagged all over his record. I turned the screen around and slid my phone across the table until it rested beside his pen. You mentioned logging this meeting in your journal, I said. By all means, do that. But you might want to review your current standing with the state board first. Your notary commission is on probationary status for multiple failures to verify identity. It seems the state is already watching you very closely. And since you're here tonight trying to oversee a coerced signature for a fraudulent commercial loan, I'm sure the board will see this as a career-ending violation. Davies leaned forward. His eyes darted across the phone screen. All the color washed out of his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly shade of gray. He was used to scaring people who didn't know the law. He was not prepared for someone who had the regulations memorized. His confidence crumbled. He wasn't a neutral party anymore. He was an active accomplice to felony fraud. The legal risk had just jumped from my father and landed directly on him. I tapped my fingernail against the phone screen, making a sharp clicking sound in the silent restaurant. I'm about to hit the button to report this encounter directly to the fraud division right now, I said softly. Davis didn't try to argue. He didn't look to my father for help or even ask about his payment. His survival instinct kicked in. He grabbed his stamp from the table and shoved it into his briefcase. He snatched his pen and stood up so fast his legs slammed into the table, making the wine glasses shake. He didn't say a word, just turned and practically sprinted for the restaurant's exit. He almost plowed into a server carrying a tray of cocktails, but never even slowed down. He just shoved through the heavy glass doors and disappeared. The fraudulent contract was left sitting there, useless, next to the pepper grinder. His sudden departure left a gaping, silent hole at our table. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my clutch. I looked at my parents. My father was frozen. His mouth hung open in pure, dumbfounded shock. He had staged this whole dinner, thinking his hired notary would bully me into signing. Instead, he watched his entire plan flee in terror. My mother sat perfectly still. She gripped the stem of her Chardonnay so hard her knuckles were bone white. Her sweet, conniving smile was gone. All that remained was the raw, panicked knowledge that they had no other legal moves left. The Bellevue condo deal was officially dead. Their credit line was gone. They were trapped in the financial ruin they had created for themselves. The silence in the air was thick and heavy for a long minute. Then our waiter came back, notepad at the ready. He glanced at the empty seat where the legal help had been just moments before. He cleared his throat, trying to slice through the tension. "Are we ready for any appetizers?" he asked, with a polite professional smile. "Or are we waiting for some other mystery backer to arrive?" My father choked on his water. He had nothing to say. My mother stared down at her plate, her perfect hostess facade finally crumbling in front of the restaurant staff. I raised my glass and took a slow, pointed sip. "No," I answered, my voice like ice, "that backer isn't coming." I stood from the table, smoothing the front of my silk dress. I looked down at the two people who had treated me my entire life like an emergency fund. They wanted me to fix a disaster they engineered. They expected me to sacrifice my own hard-won security for their illusion of wealth. I took $100 bill from my purse and laid it on the table to cover my wine and the waiter's impending migraine. "I'd suggest you enjoy the filet," I said. "It might be the last decent one you'll eat for a very long time." I turned and walked away, leaving them to face the reality of their drained accounts and the worthless paper between them. I drove home knowing this battle was just getting started. My father was a cornered animal, and that kind of desperation makes a man reckless. By the time I was home, my brother Ethan was probably already on the phone with him. The legal strategy was officially a dead end. They realized spreadsheets and signatures were no longer weapons they could use against me. They decided the only way around my control was to steal the physical property deed and wipe my home server. They were now prepared to be common thieves. I walked into my quiet house and flipped on the bank of security monitors. The screens blinked to life, showing all angles of the dark, silent street outside. I pulled my phone out and typed a short text message to Maya. The trap was set. I set the phone on the counter and waited for the break-in that was sure to come. The corporate loopholes were closed, and desperation always breeds pure stupidity. My father and brother had played their final legal card at the restaurant tonight. Now they were resorting to brute force. I sat there in my dark living room, watching the screens. The blue glow from the monitors cast shadows on the polished floors. My grandfather, Walter, taught me the value of preparation long before he passed away. He always said, "Never put your faith in a lock, Amelia, put it in a lens. Locks can be broken or picked, but cameras capture a person's real intentions, every single time, without fail." At 8:15, the motion sensor chimed. I looked at the main display. A white work van had parked at the end of my driveway. 3 figures got out into the night. I recognized my father and Ethan right away. They were dressed in dark clothes, doing their best to fade into the shadows. The third man was in a gray work shirt and held a heavy tool bag. He looked young, maybe in his early 20s. He was clearly a rookie locksmith. You could tell by the nervous way he carried himself. My father pointed at my front door, spinning some lie to the kid to get him to drill the lock. I turned up the volume on the exterior microphone. The crisp night air carried their footsteps and their whispers. "We think there's a serious pipe burst inside," my father said, faking a tone of deep worry. "She's out of the country, and we're her immediate family. We need you to get that door open before the whole foundation is destroyed." The young locksmith just nodded, pulling a power drill from his bag. He didn't bother asking for any ID or proof they belonged there. He just wanted to get paid for the emergency call and be on his way. Ethan stood just behind him, holding his right leg unusually stiff. A steel crowbar was pressed flat against his thigh, barely hidden by the dim light from the porch. He'd brought his own tool, just in case the professional took too long. It was such a pathetic attempt at being intimidating. They actually thought that by destroying my files and smashing my server, they could just erase the digital records held by the county. They had no idea that property titles exist on secure state servers, not in some flimsy manila folder sitting on a desk in a home office. They believed that paper was the only true source of power. They were still stuck in an old world mindset, trying to fight a digital war with analog tools. I watched the locksmith step up to the door. He knelt down, examining the deadbolt. The sharp whine of his drill bit chewing through metal echoed through the speakers in my living room. My father paced on the steps. He kept glancing over his shoulder, checking the quiet street for any prying eyes. He knew he was committing a felony, but his ego was so massive he was convinced he'd never face the consequences for his blatant criminal act. Tonight, I didn't get up. I didn't go to the door to confront them. Yelling through the door would only fuel their sense of chaos. It would give them something to push against. I chose to be a ghost in my own house, letting them walk right into their own self-destruction. I reached under the end table beside my chair, my fingers finding the smooth plastic of the silent alarm. I had this system wired directly to the sheriff's dispatch 3 years ago, right after I bought the house. I pressed the button. No loud siren went off to warn them. No lights flashed inside the house. The only sign it was working was a tiny green light blinking on the panel. The dispatch center now had my exact address, the type of intrusion, and a live link to my security cameras. Deputies were already on their way to my neighborhood. I picked up my phone. I opened my messages and went to my encrypted chat with Maya. We'd worked out a clear plan yesterday after Ethan had stormed into my office. I typed 4 simple words. They are here right now. I hit send and saw the message was delivered. Maya was sitting in a hotel room across town with a freshly printed stack of divorce papers. She was just waiting for Ethan to cross this one final line. My text was her signal. She would leave the hotel now and drive directly to my house. The timing would be perfect, lining up with the police's arrival. I put my phone face down on the sofa and turned my full attention back to the high-definition screens. The technician finally drilled through the last pin in the deadbolt. Little brass shavings rained down on the welcome mat. My father wiped sweat from his brow, even though the night air was chilly. Ethan shifted his stance, his grip tightening on the crowbar. They were maybe 3 minutes away from getting inside. They were probably picturing themselves ransacking my office, finding my papers, and reclaiming what they thought was theirs. They saw this as some heroic rescue of the family name through pure theft and brute force. They were completely blind to the trap that was closing in around them. I took a deep, steadying breath, watching their last few seconds of deluded confidence play out in crystal clear video. Headlights washed over my lawn. The beams sliced through the dark, but there was no sound. The police cruisers were rolling down my street with their sirens off. The dispatcher had flagged the call as a silent alarm for a felony in progress. 2 squad cars slid to a stop, boxing in the white work van in my driveway. The locksmith froze mid-motion. The sound of the drill died. My father whipped around. Then the red and blue lights exploded, bathing the whole front porch in a pulsing, strobing glare. The trap was sprung. There was nowhere for them to run. 2 uniformed deputies got out of their cars. They didn't hurry. They walked up my driveway with the calm, measured pace of men who'd seen this 100 times before. Their flashing lights painted the front of my house, creating long, dancing shadows on the brick. The young locksmith instantly took a step back and dropped his drill on the porch. He threw his hands up, showing they were empty. He knew exactly how bad it looked to be holding a power tool at a potential crime scene. My father, on the other hand, didn't understand optics. He only understood his own privilege. Richard puffed up his chest and straightened his ear. He walked toward the deputies, putting on his usual country club voice. It was a practiced mix of false friendship and deep-seated entitlement, meant to show he was a man of importance, not some common thug. He thought his suit and his vocabulary would protect him from procedure. "Officers, good evening," Richard said, flashing a disarming smile. "It's all a simple mix-up, nothing to worry about. This is my daughter's home, and she's at a doctor's appointment. Her security system was on the fritz, so we came to get it sorted before she got back. Just looking out for her, you know?" The lead officer paused on the walkway, hand resting near his sidearm. His eyes were sharp, scanning the scene. He glanced at the pry bar lying near the front door. He eyed the electronic toolkit in my brother's hand. Then his gaze snapped to the seamless front door of my house. With a soft chime, the magnetic locks disengaged from the inside. The heavy door swung open silently. I stepped onto the porch, the evening air cool on my skin. I was 6 months pregnant, wearing a soft wool dress, hardly dressed for a doctor's visit. My phone was in my hand. "Officer," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Isabel Vance. This is my home. There is no security glitch. These men, my father and brother, are trying to bypass my system to access my digital vault." Richard, my father, went pale. The confidence vanished from his face. He stared, the truth hitting him like a ton of bricks. I was home, watching their whole plan to ruin me unfold. Leo tried to speak, but no words came out. I turned to the officer. "I've already sent a complete data packet to your department's cybercrimes division," I explained. "It includes audio and video from the last hour, capturing their entire attempt." They were after the proprietary blueprints for the new Aspen Resort project, which are stored in my vault. They planned to sell my intellectual property to a competitor. That toolkit was to bypass the server's physical security after they breached the network, I added. Just then, the officer's radio crackled. A voice confirmed the data packet was received and was being reviewed. The digital trail was undeniable. An architect who designs smart homes doesn't have security flaws. Leo dropped the toolkit. It hit the stone porch with a sickening crack of plastic. He finally understood. This wasn't some simple family drama over a business deal. He was a key player in a felony case of corporate espionage caught red-handed. "Sir," the officer said to my father, "place your hands behind your back." My father's gaze flickered wildly, his mind unable to process what was happening. "She's my daughter. She's pregnant," he stammered, his voice breaking. "You can't arrest us. This is a private family issue." It stopped being a family issue, the other officer stated calmly, the moment it became conspiracy to commit intellectual property theft. He produced a pair of handcuffs. The metallic ratcheting echoed in the still evening air as he secured my father's wrists. Another pair clicked around Leo's. My brother, the favorite son, let out a choked sob as the cuffs bit into his flesh. But before they were led to the car, a sleek sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver's door opened and Nina stepped out. She wore a sharp business suit, her expression completely unreadable. She walked across the lawn, ignoring the flashing police lights, as if they were nothing more than decorations. There was no panic, no screaming, none of the drama you'd expect from a wife seeing her husband arrested. She moved with the unnerving calm of someone who already knew the outcome. Leo looked at his wife, a flash of desperate hope in his eyes. He really believed she was there to save him. Nina walked straight toward the officers. She stopped right in front of Leo, clutching a thick manila envelope. With his hands cuffed behind his back, he couldn't take the papers from her, so she improvised. She shoved the envelope firmly into the breast pocket of his blazer. "You've been served, Leo," Nina said, her voice devoid of all emotion. She turned away before he could process it. Her eyes met mine and we exchanged a brief, determined nod. Our plan was working perfectly. Suddenly, tires squealed down the block. My mother's silver Mercedes SUV screeched to a halt. Caroline practically fell out of the car, her pearls flying as she ran toward the house, stumbling in her heels. She saw her husband and her precious son in handcuffs, and her entire universe collapsed in an instant. Her breathing was harsh and panicked. "Isabel!" she screamed, her voice shrill. "How could you do this? You're destroying your own family over some blueprints!" I looked at my mother, then at the scene unfolding on my porch. The flashing lights, the ruined men who raised me, and the digital evidence of their greed now secure with law enforcement. "I didn't build this prison, Mom," I said softly. "I just stopped funding it." I stepped back inside my house. The door whispered shut and locked, leaving them to the justice they had earned. 3 months have passed since my quiet suburban street was lit up by police lights. The shock from that night has settled into a hard, unchangeable truth. My father and brother learned the hard way that their family name couldn't protect them from digital evidence and federal charges. For Leo, the consequences were swift and severe. Nina filed for divorce the very next morning. As a paralegal, she knew every single loophole. She expertly firewalled her finances from his, protecting her savings and her future from the wreckage of his choices. She even reported the business line of credit he'd opened using her social security number as fraud, ensuring the $50,000 balance remained his problem alone. A couple weeks after the divorce papers were signed, a text from Nina popped up on my phone. It just said, "The security system worked. I'm out." I didn't send some long, heartfelt message back, just a simple heart emoji. She had earned her fresh start. My parents, however, were caught in a legal hurricane. The Aspen Resort Corporation didn't just pursue charges for the attempted theft. They initiated a forensic audit of my father's entire development firm, and at one action pulled the pin on a grenade, triggering a massive federal investigation into their finances. The auditors found it all: ghost employees on the company payroll, luxury trips booked as site inspections, and the piles of debt hidden behind shell corporations. The entire fantasy of their wealth simply vanished. Richard and Caroline were indicted for wire fraud and tax evasion on a massive scale. Their crimes led to a court-mandated liquidation of everything they owned. The sports cars were towed away. The bank repossessed their sprawling estate. They lost every symbol of the status they valued more than family. Now they're in a tiny, rented townhouse on the other side of town. But for them, the humiliation was far worse than being broke. The wealthy wives who once fawned over my mother at fundraisers suddenly acted like they'd never met her. My father's powerful connections from the country club stopped taking his calls. The invites to charity balls and political dinners just dried up. My parents were ghosts in a city that only respects success. They tried to pretend they were downsizing by choice, but it was pointless. The indictment was public knowledge. The whole ugly truth was available online for anyone to read. And my life, it expanded. I filled the void their drama had left. I lost nothing because I had built my career on a foundation separate from their house of cards. The Aspen Resort project was a massive success, and my firm promoted me to lead designer. I got a bigger team and a salary that secured my future and my babies. The endless days of putting out my parents' financial fires were over. Now I was building something real, something that would last. It was a bright morning in early spring, a few weeks before my due date. I was at home, sitting in the newly finished nursery with a cup of tea. The room was peaceful, bathed in soft sunlight. I pulled my rocking chair up to the large window overlooking the garden and picked up my phone. I opened my banking app. There were no frantic calls from creditors, no emergency transfers to cover their mistakes, just a clean, balanced account. I saw my savings growing, my investment solid. My future was secure. I rested a hand on my belly, feeling a gentle kick. I remembered my father at some party, bragging to his friends about his business empire. He always pitied me for not wanting to be part of it, for wanting to build something on my own. What he never grasped is that true strength isn't about leaning on a family name. It's about building a foundation strong enough for the next generation. The peace I have now, up here in the mountains, is real. This isn't that fake, brittle quiet you get at family dinners, where everyone's just holding their breath before the next fight about money starts. No, this is a silence I built for myself. A peace I bought with court filings and ironclad contracts they can't weasel out of. Now I have to ask you, what would you have done? What would you do if your own family called you selfish in public, while secretly bleeding your bank accounts dry? Would you warn them first, or just let the collection agents show up at their door? Let me know down in the comments. And if you understand this, please like and subscribe for more.